Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome you to TransCelerate's public webinar today, introducing Diversity by Design, Proactive Approaches to Facilitate Industry-Wide Diversification of Clinical Trial Participants. Next slide, please. TransCelerate is a non-for-profit entity created to foster collaboration. Our vision is to improve the health of people around the world by accelerating and simplifying the research and development of innovative new therapies. Next slide, please. Since 2012, passionate leaders and subject matter experts from TransCelerate's member companies have volunteered their time to apply their knowledge, insights, passion, and expertise to advance the TransCelerate mission. Together, we have designed, developed, and delivered over 500 nimble and pragmatic solutions to address challenges in preclinical, clinical, and drug safety while prioritizing patient needs. Most solutions are free for public download and use. Next slide, please. Just some basic logistics for today's webinar to get started. Please note that all participants will be muted for this call in order to ensure a pleasant listening experience for all attendees. You can reduce the GoToWebinar control panel for a better view of the presentation by clicking the orange and white arrow in the upper right corner. We also welcome questions throughout the session today. They can be submitted using the questions function that you should also see in your control panel. Be sure to click send after you're typing your question in the box. Next slide, please. I just wanted to cover a couple of ground rules before we dive into the content. We want to make this discussion helpful and answer as many of your questions as we can. So again, here are some quick ground rules. Participation is voluntary, as is using TransCelerate's assets and tools. The responsibility for compliance with laws and regulations is owned by the solution adopter, and you do not have to identify what company you work for. Things that we would ask you not to discuss during today's session: what vendors, sites, and CROs you're using or not using, any issues you have with any vendors, sites, or CROs, your long-term development plans, and anything related to either pricing or costs. We ask that folks do not provide questions because we cannot answer questions about vendors, costs of using or implementing TransCelerate assets and tools, and which member companies are using the assets and tools. Next slide, please. I wanted to extend a huge thank you to our team members, who is listed on this slide as currently our active team, but we've had many people along the way contribute to some of the solutions that you'll be hearing more about. So a huge thank you for our current team members and even past team members that have been instrumental at launching and contributing to these solutions. So a huge thank you to them. Next slide, please. We have several of our team members from the Diversity of Participants in Clinical Trials Initiative joining us today, who will present all that they have been involved in developing these solutions. They are also subject matter experts representing 4 of our member companies. My name is Ashley Pector. I am the event moderator, and I'd like to introduce you to and welcome Kimberly Fisher, Associate Director, Strategic Business Transformation from Johnson & Johnson, Lorena, Kuri, Head of Diversity Strategy R&D with Bristol Myers Squibb, Lien, Heinzen, Program Delivery Lead, Associate Director from UCB, and Cecile, Gonzalez-Cerimele, Senior Director, Diversity and Inclusion in Clinical Trials, Eli Lilly and Company. Next slide, please. One more slide. A little bit about our learning objectives today. So we would like our audience to leave with an understanding about key considerations to accelerate industry-wide diversification of clinical trial participants, also how to utilize tools to action those key considerations, to prospectively evolve trial design, enrollment, and participation strategy, and finally, we'll show how to navigate the newly redesigned Diversity of Participants in Clinical Trials Initiative website. Next slide, please. By way of agenda, we're now going through the introduction, but next you'll hear a bit of an overview of our TransCelerate Diversity of Participants in Clinical Trials initiative. And then we will go into some of the key considerations and tools to action diversification of clinical trial participants. And we'll end with a summary and finally Q&A from the audience. Next slide, please. All attendees have a webinar handout with links to the content that we will be discussing today, as well as other resources from our TransCelerate Diversity of Participants in Clinical Trials initiative. You should be able to get that handout by looking in your control panel under the handout section. Without further ado, I have the pleasure of presenting Cecile. Cecile, I'll hand it over to you.
Hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'd like to start out by walking you through a brief overview of the Diversity of Participants in Clinical Trials initiative. May I have the next slide, please? So this initiative was launched in 2014 to promote awareness of the need for increased diversity and provide considerations for sites and sponsors to facilitate greater trial participation by diverse populations through the delivery of targeted best practice materials, for example, patient engagement, cultural competency, community engagement, and IRB insights about reimbursement. Since then, we have observed increased industry, social, and global recognition of underrepresentation in clinical trials. TransCelerate conducted an exploratory analysis in 2020, which found widespread consensus around the need for change, in part fueled by increased public scrutiny of health inequities and racial injustices. The Diversity of Participants in Clinical Trials initiative has moved beyond awareness to equip sponsors and ecosystem stakeholders with actionable tools and resources to improve outcomes for diversification of participants in clinical trials. May I have the next slide, please? TransCelerate leverages our position as a facilitator of cross-industry knowledge and data sharing, as well as our existing assets to develop solutions that become tools and resources for improving diversification of participants in clinical trials. The diversity team collaborated with multiple stakeholders to develop opportunities for sponsors and sites to improve the patient experience by enabling participating choice throughout the clinical journey. Using feedback from these stakeholders, the team developed an integrated approach to personalizing the clinical trial experience for patients across diverse populations and multicultural audiences. May I have the next slide, please? During this webinar, you will hear more about 3 key considerations to accelerating diversification of clinical trial participants. First, you'll hear about developing portfolio and program level strategies. Second, you'll hear about positioning other stakeholders as key thought partners. And last, you will hear about delivering on commitments to DE&I. I'd like to hand it over to Kim Fisher, Associate Director of Strategic Business Transformation at J&J, to share more about this particular first topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Cecile. This section of the presentation will discuss tools and resources that the Sponsor Toolkit team developed to support sponsors' efforts at developing portfolio and program level diversity in clinical trial strategies. Next slide. As the regulatory landscape and sponsor practices related to advancing diversity in clinical trials evolve, there is a growing awareness that reactive trial-level DE-ICT strategies, even when initially successful, are difficult to scale and replicate, and often hold limited potential to drive durable impact and lasting trust among underrepresented and underserved patient populations. In response to the limitations inherent in trial-level diversity strategies, the Sponsor Toolkit team sought to develop tools and resources to support sponsors' ability to develop and deploy indication or portfolio level strategies that enable 1, a clearer articulation of data generation needs related to diverse patient populations, and 2, more carefully integrated analytical and operational strategies aimed at generating more robust, actionable data for diverse patient populations. Next slide. The portfolio and program level considerations tool provides a framework aimed at guiding sponsors through key epidemiological, studies design, and operational considerations that can be leveraged to develop indication/portfolio level strategies aimed at driving meaningful inclusion of diverse patient populations. And what I mean by the phrase meaningful inclusion is inclusion that yields more robust, actionable data for diverse patient populations. Through the use of this tool, sponsors can pressure test and deepen clinical and scientific objectives of their DEICT strategies, thereby centering the exploration of potential population level differences in disease incidence and prevalence, pathophysiology, and clinical outcomes as something that isn't nice to have, but rather something that is critical to the overall success of clinical development strategies. Next slide. The portfolio level considerations that are described in the first part of the tool are further cascaded down to the compound and trial levels. For each level, the tool includes 3 subsections. The first subsection lays out a broad set of considerations and questions aimed at providing a flexible menu of approaches that sponsors could potentially adopt to facilitate greater inclusion of diverse patient populations at different stages of clinical development. The second subsection outlines opportunities for various functions such as biostatistics, regulatory affairs, and clinical operations to partner together and generate internal and external insights critical to supporting the successful pull-through of a cross-functional DEICT strategy. Finally, the third subsection included in each level describes specific benefits to sponsors and, more importantly, benefits to patients that can be derived from developing and deploying clinically and scientifically robust DEICT strategies across the portfolio, compound, and trial levels. The sponsor toolkit's team's intention with the structure of this tool was to underscore the importance of embedding portfolio level DEICT considerations throughout the compound development lifecycle, thereby enabling the development and deployment of DEICT strategies at the trial level capable of yielding more robust data generation for diverse patient populations from early development all the way through post-market. Next slide. The feedback that we've received after the public launch of the tool has been very positive. One sponsor company that responded to our feedback survey indicated that they were able to leverage the epidemiological considerations summarized in the portfolio and program level considerations tool to guide their efforts at deepening their understanding of how specific diseases uniquely impact racial and ethnic minorities, ultimately enabling them to establish data-driven diversity goals for their studies. This feedback, along with other feedback we received from sponsor companies not summarized on this slide, indicate that this tool can be used to better structure thinking and planning related to advancing data-driven clinical trial diversity strategies. With that, I'll conclude this section of the presentation and hand it over to Lynn.
Thank you, Kim. Next slide. So I want to talk about partnerships and the need to build partnerships as really the kind of the clincher and what will get you to your goals as far as reaching diversity and inclusion targets. The need to build trustworthy and durable relationships and to educate on clinical trials is critical to reaching and engaging underrepresented patients. Many minority and marginalized communities are not as likely to participate in clinical research due to a number of factors. This low participation itself is a healthcare disparity because clinical trials provide an opportunity to participate in the development of new medicines and to access innovative treatments.
Sites and sponsors cannot make DEICT advances alone. Partnerships and collaborations across multiple stakeholders is needed to address the barriers to embedding clinical trial research into communities. We can move the needle by being intentional and implementing effective strategies to enhance participation of underrepresented populations. Next slide, please. And so you may be thinking, so what are these strategies and what do you mean by partnership and what does implementation look like? Those are some of my thoughts when I think about these descriptions of partnership and DEICT, what makes it successful. So let's start with strategies. TransCelerate has developed a number of tools. One is the sponsor toolkit, and it's provided to share understandings of diverse communities' healthcare and clinical research capacity needs. And what they did was collected perspectives from a series of stakeholder discussions and diversity roundtable events. From this, 4 key mitigation considerations were identified for successful site partnerships. And they are partnerships with community-based sites, community engagement and sustainable partnerships to build trust, site-level capacity building needs focused on site staffing, and site-level capacity building needs focused on support services. It's important to note that site engagement and capacity building is inclusive of resources and expertise to successfully recruit and retain a diverse population. It includes integrated design and operational considerations that support the generation of data for diverse populations. And these considerations have to be embedded into the clinical trial process. As well, the patient voice should be incorporated to inform trial design and ensure a pragmatic approach. So overall, what this means is we have patients, we have sites, we have sponsors, we have other organizations, and they've all got to work together to incorporate all of the aspects that we need to see for successful DEICT activities. What I really like about this tool is that it presents mitigation considerations by maturity level. So whether you're just identifying those mitigations, you're developing and embedding those mitigations, or you're at a point where you're actually maintaining successful strategies. These categories help organizations understand where they are and what to consider next. This tool even goes so far as to identify the key stakeholders that each organization needs to connect with. Next slide. Drilling down on partnerships, we know that drop-in activities don't have a meaningful and sustainable impact on DEICT. So how do you establish yourself as a trusted partner in the community in a durable way? Engagement and sustainable partnership with sites builds your visibility, rapport, and trust with diverse communities. Organizations should develop a targeted strategy to elicit critical feedback from sites on DEICT. As well, consider that you are co-identifying needs, tools, and approaches to mitigate barriers to diverse patient participation. I'd like to share some key takeaways from an article I read about diversity across a model where a university is working on access. This program has had measurable success and is really doing incredible things. First, partnership takes time. Don't expect quick wins and drop-in solutions. Trust takes time. This model that I was reading about started in 2016 and this university has actually had their most diverse enrolling class recently. So again, it takes time, but the results will come. Partnerships are not just external engagements, but remember your internal organizational supports that are also needed. Partner with intention. For example, partner directly with sites serving marginalized populations, and partner with patient and caregiver organizations. In this university access example, they partnered directly with different high schools where the numbers of graduating seniors going on to college were quite low. Build and track your strategies to see what works. Consider incremental implementation and multi-pronged approaches. You don't have to launch a super starship from the beginning. Start small and build. And there's no one size fits all. You've got to listen and build those relationships to see what works best to support your partner community. I have a brief story I want to relay about solution that was rolled out where we later gathered some incredible insights, and this was where we considered that we had a one-size-fits-all. We would solve the transportation issue for this clinical trial. We would provide a transportation service where cars could go and pick up the patients and take them back and forth to the clinics. And what we learned in a particular inner city clinical location was that the patients wanted to take the subway. They were uncomfortable with these cars coming to their neighborhoods and buildings, and all of their neighbors watching them, and all of their neighbors seeing maybe a nurse come and go or different activities. So the car service wasn't utilized at all. And this is an example where we pushed out a one-size-fits-all service, and we didn't listen, and we didn't truly partner with that community. Next slide, please. So finally, speaking about implementation, ask the simple questions. How can we support you and your patients in DEICT partnership? How can we work together to meet the needs of the patients you serve? Again, don't presume your great solutions and ideas will cover every site's needs or are the right solution for that site. From feedback that TransCelerate has received, there are organizations successfully using tools and actioning impactful strategies. This is actual feedback. The first company is moving forward to build staff capacity. And the second company is expanding a resource role to be able to partner with key diverse sites and keep those connections. They're also offering cultural competency training. This is really exciting. And this is what implementation actually looks like. At this point, there are many tools, resources, and strategies we can use to advance diversity of participants in clinical trials. As influencers and leaders, we must ensure that patient diversity considerations are embedded at an organization level and carried through to meaningful partnerships so we can reach, treat, and provide new medicines to diverse populations. I'd now like to introduce Lorena Kuri.
Hello, thank you, Lien, and thank you to my fellow panelists and to TransCelerate for hosting this. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning to everyone. Yes, I'm Lorena Kuri, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. And what I will do now is, after hearing a very good introduction on what has been done so far and some of the great tools that have been created in portfolio and program level, as well as stakeholder and engagement and capacity building. What I will do now is walk you through a little bit of, again, the why, so we don't forget. The what is need to be done with a focus on what we're responding to some regulatory bodies. And I will also introduce you to a supporting tool that is helping us to understand what and how, right? And at the end of this portion, what I will do is I will share a little bit of where you can find a lot of this information that this initiative team has put together over the past year or so. So with that, I would appreciate if we can go to the next slide. And I think that this is no surprise to anyone. Cecile mentioned earlier how the TransCelerate initiative on clinical trial diversity, equity, and inclusion in clinical trials started in 2014. But it's no surprise. It's not anymore than nice to have. All the efforts that we have seen across the healthcare ecosystem are consistent, right? And it comes from many different organizations in the medical system, in the pharmaceutical and overall healthcare, but also additional pressure and asks from different groups like patient advocates, caregivers, community outreach organizations, academia. And we have seen how it intertwines between all of them, trying to get into the same point. We know now that what is needed is to assure that the appropriate subgroups, as the FDA states, are adequately enrolled in the trial so we can enable the evaluation of safety, efficacy, and dosage. With that, this nice to have is becoming much more than the nice thing to do, but the smart thing to do from that scientific and epidemiologic imperative. And that's why in the next slide, what we will see right now, and if we can please move over, is how regulatory bodies here in the US, and this slide presented, but also around the world, are continue to shape this as a priority. And over the years, they have consistently asked the sponsors to make sure that we collect the data, that report the data, analyze the data. And especially in 2018, 2020, we saw a little bit more of a focus on how to create those draft guidances and later guidances on enhancing the diversity of the clinical trial participants. And we realized how last year they put together the draft guidance for the study diversity plans, where as sponsors, the developers are asked to present everything that walks them through the overview of the disease, the scope of the medical program, and the goals of representation. The goals of representation, which are really important because those will be addressed by the specific plan of action that as sponsors we're putting together to make ourselves accountable and assure that we respond to what is needed. And it didn't end there. We recently realized another draft guidance on post-marketing approaches to also include diverse patient populations. And here I will appreciate our host if you guys can help us to plug in a small link in the chat. I want to bring to your attention that next week, no, sorry, on November 28 and 29, there will be a public webinar that will walk the attendees through an agenda interesting on the study diversity plans. And this is a public webinar hosted by both the FDA and CDTI and others. It's just for us to understand how big this is and how it's also now enacted by Congress. So this is, as I said in a previous slide, not only the right thing to do, but the must have, right? And what I will do right now is moving into the next slide, just highlight how when some sponsors have been putting together this study diversity plan, have realized that there is a need of clarification. It's a challenge. It's a new discipline that is being created in the ecosystem. And that is the relevance of the collaboration and the value of one of the many tools that we have offered. This solution, the one that we're presenting here, the US regulatory landscape and the FDA diversity plan early insights and considerations, are very important because are providing everything that summarizes what we just showed in the prior slide with regards to everything that the regulatory bodies have put together. And you can find it in the tab on the regulatory on the diversity website. And what it does, it just helps to understand what is the precedent and the considerations when working on improving clinical trial diversity. And the one that focuses on the diversity plan early insights and considerations is also very interesting and important for us. I will speak more into detail on the next slide, please, because what I want to make this team aware of is that it provides that aggregated collection of insights and considerations gathered from different member companies. And the good thing is that it was put together by surveying member companies that worked around it. It was launched so the team conducted 8 interviews to different member companies to specifically understand the challenges and how they have been addressing the different elements of the study diversity plans. And this tool has 5 different sections. The first one focuses on like the introduction and just explains why why TransCelerate is putting this solution together and how this is a very high level overview. The second part is the impact of the guidance section. It's just analyzing how this draft guidance has increased the urgency and implementing end-to-end strategies to coordinate more efficiently like the diversity, equity, and inclusion in clinical trials efforts. The third part is focusing also on the challenges, successes, and opportunities, where everything that goes through cross-functional alignment, different processes to be more efficient in the completion of each of the sections. There is also a very interesting scientific approach on the strategy to explore how diversity might be applied globally. And then the conclusion, which summarizes the existing situation on this implementation. And of course, it ends on what are like the planned future engagement. So I do encourage you to take a look at this tool because I'm aware how different sponsors still are learning and building up the study diversity plans, and we have been sharing as much as we can on that collaborative spirit to make them worthy, right, and support the patients in need. I think that with these, I am officially ending up my section, but I will take a little bit more time to summarize what we have gone through today. If we can please go to the next slide. And I have an ask for everyone who is attending this session today. I believe that we have over 100 people online, and that is great. In the next slide, I do want to expose you to our website, and I do believe that we will also click or add the link in the chat. Just look into this website and navigate in it. You just need to go to transceleratebiopharmainc.com, and then you just click into our solutions, and then clicking to the specific part that says diversity of participants in clinical trials. It's under patient experience, and you can access all of the solutions that we have exposed you today throughout the diversity of participants in clinical trials home. And navigate, make yourselves familiar with it. It is very useful, but our ask is not ending here. I have another thing to request from everyone who is here. And in the next slide, this is a call to action that we should continue to maintain as part of our core objective, because yes, there is a very good progress so far, but also as ecosystem, we need to understand that there is much more work that we need to do. So on that end, please make sure that you look into the website, you review all the tools that are now available to all of us. Consider which ones are as a fit for purpose, or which ones may align with your company's objectives, right? Work with them, utilize them. And as we have always said, please partner with everyone else that is part of this ecosystem so you can identify different needs and ways to address those needs. We cannot emphasize enough how this is a collaborative space. This is totally pre-competitive, and I do believe this is a very good example on that. And please provide feedback, get back to the group. We want to hear about your experiences. Do visit the Engage with Us page that I will share it in the next slide, where there are additional tools and resources in which you can contact the team, right? We have the website. Please make sure that you are signed up to receive every update that is available there. Everything related to social media, rate it, post it, comment it. That's how the feedback is built. That's how the collaboration is strengthened. And I think that everything related to the different events and all the other solutions that have been built outside of the diversity of participants in clinical trials group have been put together are also available. And read everything that we are posting. This is again a call to action to everyone who is aligned on this objective, because as I said earlier, all the progress has been made. We do need to continue working on this, and there is much more than we need to do. And I think that with that, Ashley, I will hand it to you so you can bring us home.
Great. Can everyone, I think my audio should be better now. Thank you so much to our presenters, Kim, Lorena, Lien, and Cecile. Really appreciate it. And maybe just to further elaborate on Lorena's point, if you do have any additional questions regarding our initiative after today, absolutely feel free to reach out to us through events at TransCelerate Biopharma Inc.com.